Let's be honest, your future landlord is hoping you will not read the fine print. They're banking on you being so thrilled about your new place that you'll just flip through the pages and sign on the dotted line. But hidden in that dense legal jargon, there are traps. Clauses designed to do one thing: take your money and your rights. People lose thousands of dollars to these rental scams every year, caught by words they didn't understand, or worse, they didn't even read at all. Before you sign a single thing, you need to see this video. A lease is a binding contract. That doesn't mean that everything in it is legal. A landlord can try to put whatever they want into that document, hoping you won't know any better. But after this, you're going to. I'm breaking down 7 of the biggest scams hidden in rental agreements. I'm going to show you how to spot them, what they really mean, how to protect yourself. By the end of this video, you're going to be able to sign your next lease with confidence, knowing you are not getting scammed. Alright, let's jump right in. The first scam is one of the most common and dangerous because it tries to make you pay for your landlord's problems. This is the "you fix it" clause, the waiver of the warranty of habitability. Somewhere in that wall of text, you might see a line that says you're renting the apartment as is, or the property as is. Look, it may even make you initial a clause saying you're responsible for all repairs. This is a scam. It's called the waiver of implied warranty of habitability, and it's the landlord's attempt to make you responsible for keeping the place livable. Here's the deal. In almost every state, landlords are legally required to provide and maintain a safe, habitable home. The basic intent of this right is that you can't sign away, no matter what the lease says. The warranty of habitability means the landlord must provide essentials like working plumbing, safe electricity, heat in the winter, and a home free of huge problems like a leaky roof or pest infestations. If you see an as-is clause, you know in most places it's legally unenforceable. Imagine your furnace dies in January. A clause like this would try to force you to pay thousands of dollars for a new furnace. No hot water? According to this scam, that's your problem and your bill. But the law almost always says that keeping these essential systems running is the landlord's job. So what do? First, know that that is a giant red flag. It shows that the landlord is either clueless about the law or worse, knows it and is hoping you don't. You should ask to have that clause removed. Send a polite email saying the clause is unenforceable under your state's laws and needs to be struck out before you sign. If they refuse, you should seriously think about walking away. A landlord who starts things off by trying to trick you is not someone you want to rent from. Next is a sneakier clause that can drain your bank account when you move out. We call this the blank check security deposit clause. You've seen this before, a vague section saying your security deposit can be used for damages beyond normal wear and tear. But what does that mean? Some landlords keep this language intentionally vague. They want it fuzzy, turning your deposit into a blank check that they can cash when you leave. They use it to pay for routine maintenance and upgrades, all on your dime. And here's how this works. You live somewhere for a few years, the carpet gets a bit worn from walking on it. The walls may have some scuffs or pinholes from hanging pictures. That's the definition of normal wear and tear. It's just what happens when somebody lives in a home. But a landlord with a vague clause might decide to interpret normal as the exact pristine condition you got it in. Next thing you know, they're charging you $800 to repaint the whole apartment, $1,200 for a new carpet, and $200 for deep cleaning, even though you left the place spotless. And just like that, your $2,200 security deposit is gone. You just paid to renovate their property for the next person. Look, this isn't legal. Landlords can only deduct for actual damage you caused, like a giant hole in the wall or a broken window. Leaving the place a total mess. They can't charge you for the cost of normal upkeep. The solution is all about your documentation. Before you move in, take a detailed video and tons of photos of the entire apartment. Document every single scratch, stain, and scuff. Email this to your landlord on day one. This creates a timestamped record proving the issues were already there. And I gotta tell you, I have a ton of rental properties I've had over the years, and I have never had a tenant return a sheet to me that I give them and say, fill this out if there are any problems with the apartment so we know they were there when you moved in. I've never had a tenant turn that back in. And they're just giving carte blanche. When you move out, do the exact same thing. Take photos and videos of the clean, empty property to prove that the condition is clean, empty, and in reasonable shape. If they still try to steal your deposit, you're going to have all the proof you need to challenge them, even in small claims court. Look, number 3, it's not just about the money. This one's also about your safety. This is the "it's not my fault, it's yours" clause. Okay? This is written in the hope of dense legalese that's designed to make you skip it. If you ever get a contract, a lease, or document where there's a block of text that's in 9-point Times font, all caps, and justified, it's designed to make you not read it. That is the clause you absolutely 100% have to read. In a fair lease, the indemnity or hold harmless clause just means that if you cause damage and get the landlord sued, you're responsible. For example, if your bathtub overflows and floods the apartment below, you're going to be on the hook for that, and that makes sense. But the scam version makes you responsible for everything, even things that are the landlord's fault. It's a sneaky way for them to shift their legal responsibility onto you. Let's say there's a loose handrail in the building's hallway. You've told the landlord about it in writing, but they never fix it. A friend comes to visit, leans on it, the railing breaks. They fall and get seriously hurt. Who do they sue? The property owner? Your landlord? Well, but if you sign a lease with a broad indemnity clause, your landlord could turn around and force you to pay their legal fees and settlement. Even though the injury was caused by the landlord's negligence, the piece of paper you signed could make you financially liable for tens of thousands of dollars. The good news is that in many places, clauses that force a tenant to pay the landlord's own negligence are legally void, and that's because they go against public policy. A landlord has a duty to keep the property safe, and they can't just pass that responsibility on to you in the fine print. The solution: read this section like a hawk. Look for phrases, "tenant shall indemnify landlord from any and all claims," or "liability arising from any cause." If the clause doesn't specifically exclude the landlord's own negligence, you have to push back. Insist on adding language like, "This indemnity does not apply to damages caused by the landlord's own negligence or willful misconduct." Look, if they won't change it, you're looking at a landlord who refuses to be responsible for their own property. That's a risk you just can't afford. By the way, if you're finding this information helpful, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and hit the like. My goal here is to give renters the knowledge they need to protect themselves. And your support will help me reach more people. Now let's talk about a clause that makes your affordable apartment extremely expensive. This is the automatic rent escalator clause. When you sign a 1-year lease, you expect your rent to be locked in for that year. But some landlords sneak in an escalation clause, and that allows them to raise your rent mid-lease, or automatically jacks it up by a huge amount when you renew. This scam comes in a couple of different flavors. The most obvious one lets the landlord raise your rent during the lease if their own costs, like property taxes, go up. So if the city raises taxes, or the county raises taxes, your rent could suddenly jump by $150 a month, even though you thought you had a fixed price. For a standard term lease, this really isn't usually enforceable unless it's laid out with very specific limits. The more common version is the automatic renewal escalator. The lease might say that if you renew, your rent will increase based on market rate. The problem is that market rate is whatever the landlord says it is. They can just declare the new rate is 15% higher, and you technically already agreed to it, so you have no room to negotiate. Another trick is a clause that auto-renews your lease for another full year, unless you give 60 or even 90 days notice that you're leaving. A lot of people miss this deadline, and they get trapped for another year. And to make it worse, the clause also states this automatic renewal comes with an automatic 10% rent hike. Okay, first, automatic renewals in leases is extremely common. I have them in all of mine. Every lease I have for tenants has the automatic renewal in it. For a landlord, budgeting your vacancies and your marketing really helps you plan on that. The tenant giving notice or not giving notice and giving you time to get the property relisted, plan any maintenance you have to do while it's empty. That's a really important thing for a landlord. That's why an auto renewing lease is common and isn't out of line. However, you have to make sure you mark your calendar if you're planning on not renewing. Okay, make sure you get your letter of non-renewal in. Now, as for the automatic 10% hikes, look, your solution here is to demand clarity and negotiate. You know, be suspicious of any lease that doesn't have a fixed rent amount for the entire term. Frankly, I have never raised the rent on a tenant that has renewed their lease. I've had tenants that haven't had their rent raised in 8 years, okay, because I just won't do it. A lot of landlords will raise rent every year to keep track with the market. But for a renewal clause, you want to make sure that there are specific numbers in there, okay? A 2-3% annual rate increase, that might be reasonable, but a 10% jump or a vague market rent, that's a trap. Insist on a defined cap. You can also ask for the clause to be changed to a right of first refusal, meaning the landlord has to offer you new terms, and you have the choice to accept or decline instead of automatically being locked into it. The fifth scam is all about using fees to punish you far beyond what the law allows. This is the pay up or else clause. Okay, a landlord can usually charge fees for things like paying rent late or breaking a lease. But legally, these fees are supposed to be reasonable. Okay, a reasonable estimate of the actual financial damage the landlord suffered. They're not allowed to be punitive or a source of profit. The scam is writing in excessive penalties that are totally out of proportion. You know, let's look at late fees. A reasonable fee typically is a small percentage of your rent, like 5%, or a flat fee like $50 that covers the administrative hassle. The scam is a clause that charges something crazy like $50 per day that the rent is late. You know, if you're 10 days late, you suddenly owe an extra $500. This is almost always considered an illegal, unenforceable penalty. The same thing goes for lease break penalties. Life happens. You get a job in another state, you have to move. Many leases have a clause demanding 2 or 3 months' rent as a flat fee to terminate early. However, in many states, that's not legal. Landlords can generally only recover their actual damages, meaning the rent they lost while the unit was empty. They also have a duty to mitigate their damages, meaning they have to make a real effort to re-rent the apartment quickly. They can't just let it sit empty for 6 months and send you a massive bill. If they find a new tenant the month after you leave, they can only charge you for the 1 month of lost rent. Okay, the fix here is you got to know your laws. Search online for your state's rules on late fees and lease termination. In Missouri, there's a Landlord tenant handbook that the Attorney General's office puts out. They update it almost every year. Okay, but go find it. If you see a clause with daily late fees or a huge lease break penalty, challenge it. You can say, my understanding of the state law is that penalties are limited to actual damages. This clause appears to be unenforceable, and I'd like it revised to reflect the current state law. This shows that you're an informed tenant who will not be pushed around. Next, a clause that attacks your basic right to privacy. The "we can enter at any time" clause. I've seen this many times in Missouri, and probably you have in other places. Look, your home is your private space, and you have a legal right to the quiet enjoyment of it. Okay, that means your landlord can't just barge in whenever they want. In almost every state, landlords must give reasonable notice before entering your home for non-emergencies, typically 24 hours in writing. The scam is a lease clause that makes you try to sign that right away. You know, you might see language like landlord reserves the right to enter the premises at any time without notice. This is a huge violation of your privacy, and it's usually illegal. Okay, think about this. That means the landlord could walk in on you while you're sleeping, while you're in the shower, while you're having a private conversation. It completely destroys your sense of security. While landlords do have a right to enter for specific reasons, repairs, showing a unit, they have to follow the legal process. The only real exception is in a true emergency. Fire, major flood, gas leak. An inspection is not an emergency. Look, the solution here is non-negotiable. If you see a clause in your lease that gives up your right to proper notice, you must demand it be removed. You can reference state law directly, say, look, this clause violates state law, which usually requires 24 hours written notice for non-emergency entry. Please amend the lease to comply with the law. And a landlord who argues this, they're telling you they don't respect you. They don't respect you, they don't respect your privacy, and they don't respect the law. It's one of the biggest red flags you can find. Never sign a lease that gives your landlord a key to your home without any rules attached. And finally, we have the most sinister clause of all, the one that tries to take away your ability to fight back. The "you can't sue us" clause. Look, this is a landlord's trump card. After lacing the lease with shady clauses, they're going to add one more, and that's a section where you agree to give up your right to sue them. This can show up as a mandatory arbitration clause or a waiver of jury trial. You know, mandatory arbitration clause means that if you have a dispute, say they won't fix the heat or they stole your security deposit, you can't take them to court. Instead, you're forced into a private arbitration process. Arbitrators are not judges. The rules are different, and the decisions often favor the person who is the repeat customer, the landlord. These decisions are also very difficult to appeal. The clause effectively locks you out of the courthouse. Likewise, a clause where you give up your right to a jury trial is just as bad. A jury of your peers might be more sympathetic to you than a single judge, and the landlord knows it. In many jurisdictions, these clauses are unenforceable. And when it comes to issues like habitability or safety, you can't be forced to sign away your fundamental rights. So don't do it. Now, the solution here is if you see any clause that mentions, the solution is if you see any clause that mentions arbitration or restricts your right to take legal action, stop. This is a deal breaker. This is a full stop. The landlord wants you to give up your legal rights before you even move in. That's a landlord who expects that you're going to have a reason to sue them later. There is no reason for this in a residential lease. Its presence is the clearest sign of a bad faith landlord. Walk away. Find a landlord who is confident enough in their business practices that they are not afraid of being held accountable. Look, so there you have it. 7 of the worst clauses landlords try to sneak into rental agreements. From making you pay for their responsibilities to stripping you of your rights to privacy and legal action. These scams are designed to put you at a disadvantage from the very start. Now you know what to look for. You know how to spot the fuzzy language, the illegal waivers, and the ridiculous fees. Knowledge is power. By reading every line and questioning every shady clause, you're taking back control. And here's the golden rule. Never sign a lease you haven't read completely or don't fully understand. Never let a landlord rush you. If they pressure you, say there are other applicants or dismiss your questions, they're showing you exactly who they are. A good landlord will have a fair lease and will be happy to answer your questions. I have gone through leases with tenants many times. I sit down and I go over my lease with my tenants line by line by line. I use it as a way to exclude tenants at the last minute. If they won't take the time to go over and understand their expectations, they have no intent of following through in the lease. Likewise, if a landlord is giving you a lease and they won't answer your questions, they probably don't have any intent on following through. Or there are things in there they don't want you to know. So remember, landlord-tenant law is vary state by state and even by city. So a quick search of your local laws is always a smart and extremely important move to do. So what is the worst lease clause that you have come across? Let me know in the comments below. Sharing your story may help other renters know what to look for. And if you want to learn more about your rights, check out our other videos, and thanks for watching. Stay smart out there.